Hello everypony, this is Dash Assault here again for the last video of my tutorial series. In this video I'll be covering making Peaky's Cutie mark, we'll be doing some touch-ups, and I'll be teaching everybody how to export their image so that you can post it on the internet. So let's start with the Cutie mark over here. It's all rather bizarrely distorted and whatnot, but we're going to make it distorted because that's the way the original reference screenshot looked like. For a reference of what the Cutie mark looks like, I've got my color guide over here, where you can see what the different colors and kind of how the balloons look here. Now you'll note that the tail of this middle balloon goes to the left here, whereas in our picture here, it goes to the right. It's really hard to see, but it does. The reason for that is because in this shot, Pinky's to the right, so we're seeing her right flank, whereas in this picture, we're actually seeing her left flank. So it actually is kind of a mirror image thing going on here with these cutie marks. So you want to be a little bit careful if you want to be perfectly show accurate and you're really anal, that you'll want to make it look exactly like your reference screenshot. So we're going to go ahead and use a few techniques here to actually get this rendered up properly. What we'll do is first we'll kind of try to trace this strangely distorted stem of the balloon here to kind of figure that looks like this. Then I'll be using the Bezier curve tool to kind of trace my 5 points on this. Actually, that's not going to work so well because it needs to actually know what the curve is. So let's go for the curvature of this guy for 5. And we'll use our old generate ellipse from 5 points trick. That looks kind of right. And you'll note we've got a bit of overlap here. That's actually not going to be too much of a problem for us, except, well, here's another error I made. I put all this stuff on the tail. I'm actually going to need it way up here in the cutie mark, so I better move this stuff up to that level first. I'll select everything, and then use Shift Page up to keep moving it up my layers until we get to the cutie mark. There we go. Alright, so now we can hide this layer and kind of get an idea for what this looks like. This is maybe a little too large. I'll just kind of shrink it slightly. At any rate, now we got our distorted balloon thing. Well, we actually want this to be one shape. So the best way to do that is to select this side, hold down Shift, select the other side, and then we'll go up to Path and we'll use this function here called Union. This is actually a series of transforms here that are super useful when combining two different shapes together. We're just going to be using Union here. There's a lot more complicated and interesting things you can do with the other transforms here, but I'll let you experiment among yourself on how to do that. So we'll click Union, and the end result of that is it basically takes the interior of both shapes and eliminates anything that overlaps. So now we have something that looks more or less like a balloon. We're going to continue on, and we're going to create other balloons in a similar fashion. So I'll just kind of draw something that looks kind of like the balloon shapes here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we'll turn these guys into more balloons. I want to have them overlap here so that we can do our little trick. That one does not really look what I want it to look like. So we're just going to have to play with it a little bit. But you know, in general, they're going to look kind of goofy due to the way they're all distorted here. Alright. We'll try to combine these and see what they look like. Nope, that's not very good. We'll try this. Oops. Well, you know, obviously we can't union one object with itself. So we'll try again. That's a little bit better. Although it does look a little bit fat around the middle. Maybe I'll just push that in a little bit. This guy definitely doesn't look like a corner either. So we'll make sure he's a corner node. Make that look a little bit more balloony. Union these guys. Ooh, that's really not good. We'll delete you. And, well, no. Nope, didn't like that at all. I think it'd be better to actually move this shape around instead. I'll just tilt this a little bit. Kind of play with this, drag that in. Oh, one note, if you hit the space bar, it'll switch to the last function you use, which can make it a lot quicker to swap back and forth and work in Inkscape. That can be very useful. All right, that looks a little bit better. And we'll just drag it in a little bit. Okay, cool. We've got our balloons now. Those won't be too hard to color, but we'll do that last because we want to draw our little stringy lines. Now, there's a few ways you could do that. You could use the standard Bezier tool we've been using here, and this kind of goes like this, right? And then you kind of smooth the line out. There's another way to do this too, though. We can use the pencil tool here. You don't really use the pencil tool that often because it can be a little more tricky to use, but here's how this pencil tool works. If you have the smoothing set way low and you kind of draw around, you're going to end up with shape with 30 bajillion nodes in it, which usually is not very desirable because the fewer nodes in an object, the better. So if what we're going to do is take the pencil tool and we're going to move the smoothing up to around 70, well, that's going to do for us is it'll just generate only a few nodes in there. So it'll be a smoother shape. You could experiment with turning it all the way up too, in which case you usually just end up with a single line. It doesn't want to put intermediate nodes in there, so maybe that's not quite so helpful. So I'm going to turn this back down to 70, and then I'm going to attempt to draw my line here. So this goes kind of out like this, then back in, and then makes a loop. Oop, that was a little funky. We'll draw this out a little bit more, and maybe we'll draw this guy up a little bit. That doesn't look half bad. Oops, I got both nodes selected. I'll click off here so I can get back to having one node selected. All right, that's not awful. This maybe has too much of a curve, more than a curve that I want. I'm being a little bit silly here because I think this actually needs to be a narrower shape. So I'm going to have to compress this. Maybe I should make this a square node. Oops, not double square there, but this is one of those cases where you just have to fiddle around with it for a while until it kind of meets up with your approval. That's not all that great still. Grrr. I think I had something more acceptable earlier, perhaps. Oh well, we'll just roll with it again. If you're a perfectionist, I'm sure you'd spend more time on it, but that's okay. Unfortunately, I find more often than not that I end up being perfectionist myself. Okay, that's good. We'll go back to our pencil tool again to work on the others. This goes kind of out like this, and then back up like that, whereas this goes out like this, and then back up like this. I like my make a little bit more circular, though. You know, in the original reference image, they're a little bit more stretched out. Well, you know what? Play around with it a little bit. Have a little bit of fun. Doesn't have to be perfect again. Okay, cool. Now we've got our balloons. So what we're going to want to do is color them properly, and they kind of alternate the colors here. So we're going to need the Cutie Mark colors here, 80 D1 F6, back up to fill and stroke, 80 D1 F6, and I'll double check that. Yep, that's correct. And we'll turn off our stroke path so we can get just the object, and we'll copy the style over there. We'll copy the style. Oh, that's not going to work because that's going to set the fill instead of the stroke paint. We're actually going to want to set the stroke paint instead. So we'll go to a fill here, copy the color, go over it here, go to the stroke, change this color. So that's the right color. And then we need to change everything else to yellow. FDF 6AF. FDF 6AF. That's the yellow color. Paste that. Change the fill to that color. Control C, change the fill, Control V, turn off the stroke. And then you'll notice we've got kind of this goofiness going on here. So what I'm going to do is drag this up a little bit and then hit N to move that to the bottom to hide it underneath the other shape. These guys got kind of the same issue, so I'll just stretch that line out, hit N to make it go to the bottom. Same for this one here. All right, we got our cutie mark. So let's turn back on our body color. And we're pretty much good to go on Pinkie Pie here. But there's one other thing I want to touch up here. So we'll go on to part 2. I've been a little bit annoyed that I didn't do as good a job as I wish I did up here. So I'm actually going to hide the head and the head color so we can see what's going on here. This line here is really thick until it gets hidden behind her eyelash here. But what I've drawn is actually this line here, which is just thin. No way of getting around that. So I'm going to double up the thickness of this line, I think, to make it look nicer. So I'll get my Bezier curve here. I'll kind of draw my line out there. I'm going to do my best to more or less match the curve there, just right next to it. And then I'll make this one the same color, stroke the same color, and then I'm just going to play with the width here until it overlaps. That may not be quite right, so we'll just move this whole thing in just slightly. Oops, want to select the entire shape. Actually, it'd be easier to go to the regular shape selector to do this. So does that look kind of thick enough? It does look kind of thick enough. So then all we have to do is turn back on the color there, turn back on the eyelashes, and then that little area here, well, it's supposed to get covered up, but I didn't make the line quite long enough to make it happen. So we'll make the line longer, and now there's no way of telling that I've covered this up and I've made it look right. Cool. So that's fixed. Now the next step is to export this image. So what we're going to do is basically anything that's visible on the page will be exported when you export this. So if we take layer 1 and we turn the visibility off, that just leaves our character. And so when we export, all we'll see is our character, which is good because that's what we want. So what you do is you go up here to File, Export Bitmap, and then you have a couple options on the areas you want to export. Page is going to export this entire page area as designated by Inkscape. Drawing is going to draw an invisible box bounded around the largest object you have on the page and output that. Selection will only output those things you have currently selected, and custom is just some random picture image. I usually select drawings, that's the easiest way to do it, and then you can just change the bitmap size to something absurd like 6,000 by whatever. It's always better to make the bitmap large because that just increases the quality for you. So I'm just going to export it to number 3 here. Wait for it to work. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to go over here. I'm going to take that image and I'm going to open it in the photo viewer here. And now what we do is just a basic inspection to look for any imperfections that need to be fixed. While inspecting this earlier, I already noticed that this particular point here is laying outside the tail area, so that'll need to be fixed. But you just kind of look around and see if there are any lines are overlapping, or if you had a box with the colors inside. Make sure that you've moved the box to the interior so that nothing is out of place. Make sure you have all your layers turned on and that everything, all the lines look smooth and things look nice. You'll notice that when you export to bitmap, things will get a little bit jagged here. The anti-aliasing is not perfect when you export, so you just have to realize it's going to be pretty good because if you zoom in, you'll notice that, I mean, this basically has turned your vector image into a bitmap drawing, so it can't be perfect. It has to draw it in a bunch of pixels, and therefore the lines are going to suffer. They're not going to be perfectly straight. All right, let's go fix our imperfections now. We'll go back here, close this. We'll go down here and we'll say, okay, this guy is too long. We'll drag him back slightly to fix that error. I've also decided that this guy needs to be a little bit longer, perhaps. Make sure that's a smooth node. And maybe I want this guy to be a little bit longer too. But again, these things are kind of stylistic details, and it's up to you what you want to do. All right. Just little changes to make things look right. This guy has got a little bit of a weird curve problem. Gotta be a little careful though. Sometimes with these curve issues, it takes more time to fix than is really beneficial. This outer one doesn't look quite right either. Gotta be very precise here to actually make this look right. It doesn't have to be pixel perfect, it just has to be good enough so you can't really tell that something is weird with the naked eye. Okay, I think that more or less does it. So what we can do is go back to export, bitmap. It'll retain the settings you left previously, and additionally the file name. So what you can do is you can actually just export on top of the existing file. It asks if you want to replace it. You just say yes. And once that's finished, we'll just wait for this to re-render here, open it up, and now you'll get a new image with that little imperfection fixed, and things look pretty darn good now. Didn't do too bad a job. All right, good luck with your future adventures with vectoring, ponies, and have a good time. Dash Salt signing off.